remember when our son Dylan was born, one of the things I worried about was if others were going to tease him. Would he be accepted at school and expected to learn? As a special education teacher at the time, I knew it could be challenging to have students with disabilities be included in general education classrooms, not just sitting at the back of the room coloring, but really participating and learning in general education classrooms. Welcome to this week's The Art of Advocacy show. We have weekly shows here on Facebook Live, so make sure that you like the Facebook page Visions and Voices Together. I'm Charmaine Tanner, an advocate, a parent, and author of a #1 best-selling book, The Art of Advocacy, A Parent's Guide to a Collaborative IEP Process. And if you'd like your own copy, just hop on over to Amazon and you can get it there. Now, when many of us go to IEP or 504 meetings, the first thing we often hear is all about our kids' deficits, their low test scores, their behavior challenges, what they can't do, right? Have you been to those kind of meetings? I think we can do better. Let's talk about changing the focus from the student deficit approach to a student success approach. A big part of how we can change from this deficit-based model to a strengths-based model is by using the principles of universal design for learning. Now, if you haven't heard of this before, it's taken from the field of architecture. Because years ago, when buildings were designed, there wasn't much thought about all the different people who would use the building. Often we only had stairs as a way to get into buildings, no ramps. And we only had doors that you had to either push or pull in order to get inside the building. Well, as more people with disabilities struggle to get inside these kinds of non-accessible buildings, companies discovered that they needed to add things like ramps and automatic door openers. Architects discovered that it was much more cost efficient to design the building up front with these accessible things like the ramps and the elevators, instead of trying to retrofit a building and add them to the structure later. Well, the bonus that they discovered was that the things that they added when they were thinking of people with disabilities actually benefited other people. People like parents that had a stroller that were trying to get inside the building, or business people with rolling carts. Maybe somebody using crutches for a recent broken leg. These people all benefited from the ramps. So as teachers, years ago, we thought, well, maybe we should learn something from the architects. And they figured out that when they were designing the building, is the time to think about the diversity of people using that structure and how to make it accessible to more people. And so teachers thought, when we design our lesson plans, we should be thinking about, at the very onset of that plan, how we can make this lesson accessible to all the students we have in our classroom. And just like the architects figured out it was less costly to try to retrofit a building later, teachers discovered it was less of a problem if they were proactive when they made that lesson plan. And so instead of making, accommodations on the fly or trying to figure out at the last minute how they were going to help a student be involved in a lesson, teachers use these principles of the universal design for learning to help all students benefit. One of the examples that I share a lot is when I was a second grade teacher and I had a little girl in my class, Brianna, who wore hearing aids. And as her teacher, I used an FM microphone that I wore, and that helped amplify the sound to her hearing aids during our classroom. Well, one Friday we were watching a Reading Rainbow video, and I thought, boy, if I could figure out how to turn on the closed caption, that would help Brianna if she can't hear all of the TV video. Well, the next week I figured out how to turn on that closed caption on the TV set. And when we watched it with the closed captions on, what I discovered is all of my kids, all of my second graders, were learning how to be better readers, and having the closed captions go across the screen was actually a strategy that helped all my kids, not just Brianna. So that's what we want for your teachers of your children, is that they think ahead of time on how to make sure their lessons are going to be accessible to all kids. And I mentioned that there's 3 different principles of the Universal Design for Learning framework. And they are engagement, how to keep kids engaged; representation, which means how the teacher is going to present the lesson and what kind of modalities; and then the 3rd basic principle is action and expression, which means how your child is going to show the teacher what they know and what they've learned. So for this week's video, we're just going to focus on one of the principles, which is engagement. So this to me is really kind of the foundation of our lesson plans and our learning activities that we do in the classroom. We have to think about how we're going to get kids motivated, right? How to keep them interested, because if they turn us off, we know that the learning is going to be turned off also. One of the things that I like to know about my students is what kinds of things are they interested in? What do they like to do for fun? What do they like to do on the weekends? A lot of students love Legos. I mean, building huge structures, building little characters, having, acting out a play with their Lego figures, whatever. So as a teacher, it's like, how could I bring in this interest of Legos when I'm actually teaching lessons? And I found that there were some easy ways that I could do that. So the one picture shows Legos with contractions and words written on them. So what you can do is, for your base Lego, you could write a contraction on it with like a permanent marker. And then on 2 separate Legos, you would write the 2 words that make up that contraction. And the students would have to build their contractions using the Legos. So this would be a fun way to work on a reading skill using something that the student is interested in. Well, when it comes to math, it's like, so how could I incorporate Legos in math? And what I would do is use base 10 blocks. That is a great math manipulative. And for students that love putting things together and working with pieces like that, the base 10 blocks was something that really kept their interest during math time. Well, what about writing time? Not every student loves to sit down and write stories, and sometimes teachers are trying to think of prompts that they can use to get their kids to write a new story. Well, what I would do for kids who loved the Legos is that they could build a structure and they could use that as their own prompt to tell a story about that, or make little characters out of Legos, and those would be characters in their story. So there's a lot of ways that you can incorporate what a child is interested in to help them be more motivated at school. Now this slide shows some research that was done with teenagers and helping teens become more engaged in science classes. Well, a lot of teens, 81% in this survey, say that they found science interesting, but only 37% of them thought that their science classes were interesting. And what they found out is probably not surprising for us, is that the more hands-on experiments that teachers would do in a science class would keep the kids engaged in the lesson. So this tells our teachers to see what ways they can incorporate that hands-on learning in every science lesson, so the whole class period isn't taken up with a lecture or reading a science textbook. Another thing that the survey showed was that teenagers, and I would say probably most kids, really like that experience of going on field trips and actually being able to see things in person, to be able to go to children's museums, or if they're studying geology, to go out and do a hike and actually see the geology of the local location. Well, again, kids favor that field trip experience over sitting in a classroom reading a book. So if we know this as a teacher, how can we try to incorporate that? Now, we might not have the budget to go on a field trip every day, but there's things that we could take, probably walks just outside of our school building and explore the environment. I know one winter day we went out and made a huge class snowball on the playground, and we used that as our math lesson. I mean, we measured the circumference of it, we measured the height of it. We talked about a lot of different math concepts while making that huge classroom snowball. And it's something kids will remember versus doing a worksheet back in the classroom. Another thing I discovered, not only as a teacher but as a parent for my son Dylan, is that our kids with disabilities are often on the receiving end of supports, and they don't have that many opportunities to give to others or to share what they know with others. So for teachers and parents to look for opportunities where there's an area that your child shines, for instance in reading. Maybe your child is a really expressive reader, and they love the funny parts of Dr. Seuss books. Well, ask the teacher if your child could maybe go down to a kindergarten or first grade classroom once a week and read a story, a Dr. Seuss book, out loud to the kids. Not only would the kindergartners or first graders love to have a class, guest come in to read them a story, but it's going to help your child become a better reader as they're reading out loud to others. So I think it's